You heard it right here, right now from the beach.
The new ivory is mammoth.
What do you guys want to know? I've done way too much research on dinosaurs.
Almost a larger-than-life figure.
No reason at all to think it was made by aliens.
Drop down and go swimming as fast as you can. Out of whale.
All these big giants give me a kiss and tell me they don't.
The crowd, just the pot, the loudness, the excitement, the electricity. I don't know if I can take your little Canadian destroyer.
Future is scary, but it's also wonderful.
Welcome to Unscriptify, the podcast where genuine meets uncensored and conversations go wherever the fun takes us, powered by Jägermeister. Today we have a guest who helped shape an entire generation's childhood. If you have ever dreamed of finding a mysterious alien watch that turns you into incredible creatures, you have this man to thank. We are talking about none other than Duncan Rouleau, storyteller, one-fourth of the powerhouse team known as Man of Action and one of the brilliant minds behind Ben 10. Duncan has done it all: animation, comics, and even shaping some of the most iconic superheroes we grew up and you are growing up currently. So we are going behind the scenes of Ben 10's creation, insane evolutions, and maybe even asking the big question, like, which alien would be the best for dodging awkward social situations? So Duncan, thanks for joining us, and how are you doing, and are you ready?
Thanks for having me, guys. It's an honor, actually. You have quite a lineup of people to interview, so I was just kind of going over all the different people that you had the privilege to talk to, and so many incredibly interesting people. Oh, boy. So
Yeah.
I feel a little humbled.
Well, you are sharing a big screen, so. Yeah, I mean, it is also a privilege to be on this side of the screen, and for all the guests that we have so far, including you now, because when we are choosing who to be our guests, we are choosing the best from their industries. For example, even if we have a numismatic collector like Jeff Garrett was, he's the one of the best to do it. So, always the top of the echelon.
Oh, yeah, no, it's so interesting too because some of the people that you've had a lot of archaeologists on too.
Yeah.
Which I find, that's if I had another life, if there was another me, I probably would have gone that way. That whole discipline is just so deeply fascinating to me. So
Yeah.
Well, that's the reason why we brought them as well, living vicariously.
Yeah.
Same here. I get to do it too.
Yeah, we are kind of. Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, just for what I do, being interested in a lot of different things, and kind of researching it, maybe putting yourself in pretend shoes of those people help with coming up with stories and writing and things like that. So it's just where you draw your ideas from. So just having inquisitive mind. So
Yeah, one of the ideas for this podcast as well is for the audience, because people in general are not professionals at all. People are curious and people wants to know about everything. When you go on the feed on Instagram, you scroll through comic books, you scroll to movies, entertainment, science, news, and everything. So like all those guests that we have are alternative versions of what we may become when we were children: scientists, comic book writers, actors, professional wrestlers, and all kind of stuff.
I also think that so I have 3 older brothers, and all of them became engineers and very focused, disciplined individuals in their own rights. But the big difference between me living vicariously through their work and me doing what I do, I did not have to be very good at math or yeah. Those kind of disciplines. That kind of discipline is something unique. I can only put my feet in their shoes up to a certain point, and then. But I do find myself reading an awful lot of science manuals and things like that. That's what I do an awful lot of. So
That kind of explain your relation with Ben 10 and calculation of 10 aliens, because because at the end it certainly is not 10. So math problems are everything.
That has more to do with commerce than anything else, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That was always a sacred rule that we did not want to break, but Cartoon Network had other ideas, and so did Bane.
Yeah.
Well,
But he
imagine
only
my-
operates 10 at a time. That was our our bar.
Loophole.
Yes.
Loophole, sorry.
Yeah, well, imagine the disappointment of us when the band 10,000 was announced, and there wasn't 10,000.
No. Well, still, there's still time.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so we are talking about numerous aliens, creatures, not just for Ben 10, also working on Big Hero 6, Sonic, Generator Rex, etc. When you walk into a comic convention or see a fan art online, which of your characters surprise you the most in terms of how much people love them?
Well, it kind of breaks down into a couple of different types of audiences, and you can almost tell who's going to respond or what group is going to respond to which types of aliens. Because in the original version of Ben, the aliens were much scarier. Ripjaws, Wild Mutt. These were more alien. And it was believed, I think wrongly, that they were scaring kids. I think that kids like those kind of scarier Ghost Freak, like those.
I did.
Yeah, more than the ones that are felt more like traditional. They were humanoid. Everybody loves Forearms though too, but I think a lot of boys like Forearms because the power fantasy part of it. But you could kind of tell which group would respond to which kinds of characters. So the more kind of body horror or scary kind of aliens was a certain type of group. And I guess I've always felt kindred spirit with them more than some of the other types. And then there are other heroes or villains or aliens that are homages to pre-existing characters, way big, being close to an Ultraman type of character and things like that. So you always find different groups, like people who make those connections, and it becomes interesting to them. But if I was to say hands down, the single most popular alien I've ever encountered, at least out with the talking to people at conventions and whatnot, is either Forearms or one of the fire creatures. Anybody who has fire. So
Really, no Diamond there.
Diamond Head's there, but I think he comes off as a bit of a Boy Scout, kind of like a more of a Captain America-esque kind of square-jawed hero. And I think some people like the people who are maybe a little more like Ben's character, can maybe be a little sneakier. So Diamond Head is definitely a big one. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I always felt like, now looking back, also like Diamondback was so different from other aliens that it also separated into this whole subplot of them and him having his own personality and everything. Yeah, so maybe that's why he's special to me the most.
That was something that we definitely wanted to do when we first started out. It was so funny. The very original idea for Ben was that he was going to, this was the one that never made it to the screen. Eventually did not wind up being how the show went, but it was Ben switching with alternate versions of himself. So the multiverse, but this was in the early 2000s. So just it was felt that was too complicated of an idea. But he would switch with a character called Amphibiben, where the polar caps had melted and the Earth was now water in that reality. And so he learned how to breathe through water. So when you needed a water version of yourself, you could call that up. That was the original idea. And one where the Earth's gravitational pull was so strong that everybody was squat, very short. But everybody was super strong. So on our gravitational pull, that character would be so much stronger and more powerful than, so it was like, and there was another one where the planet was taken over by vampires. So there was Benjamin Blood, and there was all of these kind of versions of him.
Oh.
And from my from the math, I was pushing for this. It didn't fly, but I wanted to go with Ben to the 10th power. The little 10 after it. They said nobody will know what that means, so I got voted down on that one. But that was how it originally started. Then Cartoon Network wanted to do a version where he turned into superheroes.
Oh,
And there is there's a DC character called Dial H for Hero, which is a guy who has a little like an old rotary dial, and he'd spin that and then turn into a hero that started with whatever the letter was that it would come up there. And so he just had, and it was like, well, that's just Dial H for Hero, guys. This is just something that we've already seen, and we don't want to do that. So that's where the aliens eventually came into being.
Yeah, how you came up with the idea of Omnitrix in all of that? Because that's like the part that actually converts from this multiverse idea to aliens one.
That's right. That was always the baseline for each one of them. It was still going to be a device that did that. Omnitrix. And early on, this was just amongst us this was before we took it to Cartoon Network, when we were kind of just battering around the ideas for it. The idea of any type of totem, like whether it was a 10-sided die, that was actually one of the ideas, a kind of a Dungeons and Dragons 10-sided die, kind of, you roll it, and that would have kept it to 10 characters. Dimes get bigger and bigger. But we kind of talked about a lot of different things, and compasses, and all kinds of different kinds of totems that would be an activator for the but we always knew it was going to be an activator. If there was any other character that we kind of drew inspiration from that was pre-existing, it was DC's Captain Marvel, Shazam.
Yeah.
And it's really the idea of a young boy in a big powerful body, and we really love that notion a lot. So when we were pitching it, and we were telling him, telling the Cartoon Network that he didn't have any control over the device, that he really didn't know how it worked. He was just goofing around with it, and then he'd figure it out as he moved along. That was something that we always wanted to do, because I do think that that's something else with any kind of hero or any kind of story. If you know everything, then what kind of story is he going to tell?
overpowered.
Yeah, exactly. And nothing works that way. Nobody automatically knows everything anyways. Or if they do, they're boring. That's bullshit. So, but they had taken the original, we did a 2-minute like test reel, and they do the focus testing. This was back when they used to do focus testing, before the internet really took off. And they would show it to a lot of kids, and all of them were very upset that Ben didn't know how to use the device right away. And they wanted us to change it. And that was something that we kind of stood fast on, said, no, we can't do that, because we're going to lose all kinds of crazy stories. And that whole thing of having a grandpa there and family around too was something else that you didn't see, at least in a lot of the cartoons that were coming out of the States at that time. You weren't seeing families. You were seeing the lone hero doing everything. And we wanted to try and bring some multi-generational stuff in there too, because this was just a great place to learn. and you can also not only learn from your own experiences, but from other people's experiences. And so
Tell me
I
this.
don't know if I answered your question. I think I just yapped. Sorry.
No issue. Tell me this, obviously, and maybe it's a bit of a dirty question, but surely, as because now you mentioned, obviously, Cartoon Network had an influence on even the number of heroes and things like that, because obviously Ben 10 became a big franchise and merchandise, I assume, was big. Of the heroes that came out, I'm not going to ask you which one was your favorite. Were there some that you hated, maybe?
That's really interesting. I have a tendency to not like heroes that are too overpowered. I'm not a big fan of Alien X, to be quite honest. Those type of characters they're more difficult to tell stories, and all of a sudden, what happens with those kind of characters, and at least in my world, I get this an awful lot on on social media, is people start power scaling, like who's going to win in a fight, and everybody wants the character that they love. Everybody wants Ben to beat the Green Lantern, or to beat Superman, or to beat you name it. And everybody's trying to figure out how. And Alien X becomes one of these characters that kind of just stops conversations because he can do everything. So
Alien X.
Yeah.
Go
I just
on.
like characters that I like characters that have one ability, clear cut, and then you use it in interesting ways. Or Ben uses it in interesting ways, imaginative ways.
Yeah, but everybody on internet is so fascinated with Alien X because he's obviously supposedly omnipotent and everything. But on the first appearance, if I remember correctly, it's the one with the battle. Was it the bridge or something when he turned into Alien X, and nobody knew what happened. He was frozen and everything. So there's this character which is omnipotent, but it starts with a mystery, and it remains a mystery for a long time. So
That was how we decided to limit his power, or the power was to make it an indecisive character, make it something that had to argue. It takes a time, and in of itself, that's an interesting story. But how many times can you tell that story every time that
yeah,
that's just so it's got a short run. But the potential for the character. A lot of people are there's a huge group of people that really love Alien X. That's their favorite. But I also think that people who some people just love the character that can do it all. I guess we all do in some, but not from a storytelling point of view. From a storytelling point of view, I love characters that have a lot of problems. I like that they have to figure it out, because that feels more real to me. Even if we're talking about heightened characters and heightened powers and things like that, we still have to figure stuff out.
But there is also, I think there's a bit of a trend of that now with those kinds of characters. I've seen it in anime, especially.
Absolutely. Okay.
These stories, and especially now because they're also much more on the good guy side. You present a character that's a godly in the universe, and it becomes hard down the line to write for that character, because you kind of, I mean, Jujutsu Kaisen fans will burn me now, but it becomes hard to figure it out, the equation with this kind of, because you write yourself kind of in the corner a little bit.
And you can solve that corner a couple of times, and it can be quite satisfying when you do. And it only creates more popularity for that character. But those corners keep on showing up. I think something like My Hero Academia is another great one. He's knows everything, loves everything, but can't do anything. That kind of character is a really fun character too. You've gotta when coming up with these things, I think, if we were to talk about world building, I think that's an essential element, is when you're thinking about a character, when you're thinking about stories that you want to tell, and you're hoping. I mean, none of us knew that Ben was going to become as big of a franchise as it was, and even with Big Hero 6, we did that for Marvel Comics. Steve and I came up with that as kind of our homage to Japanese manga and anime characters. We loved all of that stuff, but there just wasn't any real Japanese characters in the Marvel universe, or if there were, it was characters like the Silver Samurai or Sunfire, and they were all these kind of proto World War II kind of state versions of what an Asian character would be like. So they were a little more aggressive, or there was a color of World War II still on some. And I fell in love with all of that manga when I was growing up. I fell in love with an anime when I was growing up, and I thought, why isn't there a great superhero team in the Marvel universe that are Japanese? So that was how that idea came about. But as far as anything else beyond that, they need to have their problems. They need to have their backstories. They need to have all of these things that provide you a font of other ideas to go to explore. And without that, I mean, Superman is a great character in one sense, but a lot of people have a hard time with that character because it's just so powerful. They made him so powerful. Yeah. I mean, what he becomes is much like Alien X, is a character who doesn't do what he could do. And that's what makes him good, is he doesn't go out and just take over the world and do all those things. But once again, you can only tell so many of those stories up to a certain point. And 80 years of it, you know,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. And once in a while, you get to do Injustice alternative version of Superman.
That's right. Well, then you start inventing, kryptonites to make him behave differently. And
Yeah.
But is that, because I think what happens, and this is not just with these kinds of characters, this is generally in stories. And I'm not, obviously, you can speak to this as a creator. Is there when you talk about world building, you have to set some rules. Is there almost like a urge to sometimes break those rules, just maybe, and you try to almost kill yourself from it? Yeah.
Well,
And I think many writers cannot do that.
Well, so our background is in comics, and this happens all the time, and we learn some lessons. We learn some lessons from that. But it's a constant struggle, and if you don't stick to that, you always. Well, here's two classic ones from Marvel. These were two unbreakable rules when I was working over there, and also when I was a fan of the books, is that Bucky Barnes was dead. He's never coming back in the Captain America, and no one but Thor can pick up Thor's hammer. Those were two hard and fast rules. And of course, every writer who ever came to them, or any creator who came to them, had their Bucky Barnes story, or had their somebody else picks up Thor's hammer story. And for the longest time, the editor said no. Nope, these are hard and fast rules. But time moves on. Somebody finally says yes, and all of a sudden, boom, all of a sudden you have the Winter Soldier. So it's great that the Winter Soldier came in there, but it wasn't like there wasn't a whole bunch of other people who were pitching returns of Bucky Barnes stories for 30 years before that. It was just that they just held out for a long time. And I think that much like with Ben here, the fact that there are all of these aliens in there, once we broke that 10 alien marker, then we really did have to start thinking about in terms of, well, what was the Omnitrix built for? What was the bigger reason for it? And things like that. And I do think that we came up with a good reason for it, but I do also think that was an example of moving the goal a little bit. It got moved, and and I wouldn't want to do that too many more times. That's it's dangerous to do that from a storyteller.
Yeah, it's like we can compare it with Thor's Mjolnir, and when Captain America lifted Mjolnir, it was a spectacle because you have a background, you have everything. It's logical. But now when 10 characters have lifted Thor's Mjolnir,
I know
what does it mean?
it loses all of that importance. Yeah, and those spectacles are great in the moment, but they do diminish the rule over a period of time, and I think that can really cripple the longevity of a character and the world that it built. Some people say that it opens it up. It opens it up for a lot of other interpretation, and it's true. That's why some of these characters have life with different creators 30 years later. All of a sudden, somebody came up with a really great idea that the originators didn't, that's the beauty of those kind of things is
Yeah.
somebody comes along with you did.
But like with comics and for Ben 10 as well, a lot of people being involved into a process, even studios like Cartoon Network and similar. And concretely about Ben 10, are there any scrapped storylines or characters, because we are mentioning some stories that never happened and came to the screen, that you wish were included into the final version of Ben 10?
Well, it isn't necessarily that the whole things would get scrapped. It would be how they might have gotten changed a little bit. There was because talk about spectacle. With spectacle, one of the things that you can do, especially with animated shows, and the Japanese do this so much better than they do in the States. They create stories that can include a much larger audiences. They don't think about demographics. They don't go, "Oh, this is too sophisticated for this age group." Yeah, they have a tendency to expand that stuff and to allow the stories to exist in a little broader of a platform. And so what we would often get is something that we thought was really dramatic. Maybe Grandpa Max losing an arm or a hand, and actually having that be something that happens because Ben screwed up. He did something that caused harm to somebody he loved because he felt like, and we had stories like that, and we got to do that a little more in Generator Rex. But for certain ones, they would really kind of caution us or move us away from some of those kind of stories that had consequence that weren't necessarily more aliens. That changed the world, but if if Grandpa Max, didn't have a hand, that would have changed the world too, that he's in, and things like that. And so there were smaller things like that we were always, and also having heroes fail too. Like they just didn't succeed in this one. The bad guy won. They did that a little bit in they took it all back, but in the Marvel stuff. But I think that's important too. I think those are lessons that everybody should learn. As every once in a while, I won't win. You just don't win, and even if you wanted to. And I think those are lessons that from a why do this a kind of point of view, which is something that's very important to us, is any kind of stories that we tell or any characters, we want to entertain, but also there has to be a purpose to it. And when working in kids entertainment, I think it's important to not tell them everything's going to be great all the time, and you're going to figure out everything all the time. And I just think that's important. I think it's just being a good steward, a little bit.
It's not a bad lesson to learn at young age.
No, it isn't, and especially with something that's separate. This is a fantasy world and all of this other stuff, so it does kind of comfort or, it does kind of cushion the punch a little bit, but I do think that it's important. They used to do that in the early Marvel books all the time in the '60s and the '70s. Gwen Stacy died. These things did happen to these heroes, and to me, we started to think as we got into the '80s and the '90s, we started to think that kids were not as sophisticated as they are. And we started talking down to people. And one of the big things that we wanted to do is not do that. We just didn't want to, you know, you're young. Maybe you don't know a whole lot, but you know stuff.
Yeah, you're a rational being, just like adults. And
Yeah.
also in the meantime, you decided to age Ben as well in Alien Force. So was the reason to follow with the original audience that was younger and now growing up, or was it also to incorporate a little bit of more adult themes? And like you said, you are drawn to these groomy aliens and everything. Was it also a motif, or?
So, yes to all of that. And in addition to that, though, when this was happening, this was almost an audience expectation because a lot of those people were also reading Harry Potter at the same time. And the idea that the world becomes more complicated as you get a little older and, people, have there's more to them than you had first imagined. They weren't just this or that, and you are discovering more about those things. So there was almost kind of, and you would see that in a lot of popular franchises that started around that time. They started really kind of following somebody as they following the audience, but also everything that you were saying. The stories were slightly more complicated. The relationships between the characters were the idea that the world is much bigger than you first started. All of those things were wonderful things to tell stories about. And so that was all of the above were the reasons for kind of uh moving moving with Ben as he grew older. And the reboot was an attempt to kind of reset that and bring in a new younger audience. But with the aesthetics that were popular at the time, which was a little more comedy forward, it was so interesting here, stateside as far as what was considered and what would play overseas too. Things like Teen Titans, which was a little goofier, but it would still have its dramatic moments, was something that Cartoon Network really wanted to try and infuse into Ben. And I think to limited success on some of that stuff for the reboot specifically. Comedy in a short form can be kind of hard because you do it becomes jokes. It doesn't become character driven. It becomes like the setups and the circumstances more than it is the people who are involved in them. And so it's just always a very interesting and complicated kind of issue to work around with things like that. But to answer your question, yes, we wanted to tell more complicated stories as we went out into the universe and we started seeing other planets and things like that. I think it was probably better to have a character who had a little more experience under his feet. So
Yeah. Just spoke with Luca during the break, and he asked me, well, can you tell me honestly, have you watched Big Hero 6? Because I haven't either, that's one of the movies. Yeah, because that's one of the movies that's on both of our watch list for 10 years. And I was always drawn to it, but never kind of pushed that play button. And I always wanted to see it. Oh, I will see it next week. But, I know it's part of the Marvel universe. I know it's connected to that. I would like to ask you some questions about it, but maybe the best question to ask you is because you mentioned like being inspired by manga and anime, and both of us being the fans of anime. How would you recommend Big Hero 6 to us to go straight from this recording and watch the movie?
Oh, well. What would my pitch be?
Yes.
I think that it's probably more emotional than you might think it is, especially with the name Big Hero 6. There's actually it's a story about loss and about new family and 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 how to grieve. There's different ways of grieving, and some of it is through anger, and some of it is through healing, being of service. These are all of the actual themes that are involved, but at the very central core is a story of a boy and a robot, which is a very classic Japanese anime character. That's an archetype that goes way back to Gigantor and Astro Boy.
Yes.
And all of the characters that we created. Now, there are two characters that are in this version of it that Steve and I created the characters for Marvel. I'm going to get in deep for people who really know Marvel stuff. Don't know how deep you guys. Steve and I were working on it. Okay. Steve and I were working on a book called Alpha Flight. Alpha Flight is a Canadian group of superheroes, and they were introduced in the Uncanny X-Men back during the Chris Claremont, John Byrne run. It's the legendary run of that.
Yeah, probably the best one.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and also probably the books that most definitely made me go, okay, I need to work in comics. That was my those were my books from my time period. Well, they introduced this group, and they were exciting. The general joke amongst people from the States was like, "Who are these guys? Where are they from?" And they were Canadian, and so there's an ongoing rivalry between. Right now, it's a little more, little, little insane, but it was just always in my mind, it was always a friendly rivalry between United States and Canada. But they got introduced, and Wolverine was not the Wolverine yet, who is the super powerful Wolverine. He was becoming famous at that time. He was a secondary character at best, and he was coming famous during those. So to introduce Wolverine at that, or this character or this group, and they came for Wolverine specifically to bring him back to Canada, was just an exciting storyline at the time. It introduced a cool new group. A whole new world was opened up. You started thinking, because everything in Marvel Universe, for the most part, happened in New York City anyway. So the idea that there were other heroes in other towns and stuff was just something that was so deeply fascinating to me at that time. Well, Steve had been working on Alpha Flight. He had been working with a different artist who left the book, and he had asked me, actually, Joe Kelly, another one of my partners, I was working with him on some stuff. Joe Kelly asked me to start Deadpool, and Steve asked me to work on Alpha Flight at the time. And I said, I loved Alpha Flight. So I said Alpha Flight. Look at Deadpool now. I was an artist. I was a penciler working during that period. But I always work very closely with any of the writers coming up with ideas in the story. So Steve had this character called Sunfire, who is the Japanese superhero that was being held against his will in Department H, which was the kind of the big bad of the Alpha Flight universe. I said, wouldn't that be cool if there was a Japanese superhero team that came in and busted him out? Like the Canadian group came and got Wolverine, and it'd be very meta because this was this was introducing an outside team into the into the Alpha Flight, which was introduced as an outside team. I thought it would be fun. So then we came up with the characters for Big Hero 6, most of them, but we included two pre-existing Marvel characters, which was Sunfire and Silver Samurai, who then later on, when they rebooted Big Hero 6, they created Wasabi and Fred as characters in it. So didn't have a whole lot to do with the creation of those characters. Go. Well, I don't know. You guys don't know these guys. Baymax and Hero. And
Yeah, the main characters. Yeah.
Honeylet. Those were the ones that we had created, and they were all based on Japanese archetypes that we loved when we were growing up. It's like, oh yes, we need Johnny Sacco and his giant robot. We need, these things. So we went through all of that stuff when we were doing it. The only one we didn't do was an Ultraman, which we did in battle later on.
Yeah, obviously.
So that was the impetus, was to introduce this team, because like I was saying before, Marvel had a few Japanese or Asian characters in general, but they were either martial arts characters or they were older characters that had kind of these, we were once villains, but now we're okay guys, pasts and stuff like that. And I just wanted to bring in some superheroes that if you have these two cultures that both have these great histories with comic books, with storytelling, graphic storytelling, and it wasn't a good representation in the American stuff, shame on us, is what I thought at the time. So
Yeah. And in current time, with current state, in Marvel Comics in particular, with big players being heroes or anti-heroes like Venom and similar, what do you think would be the best option for crossover with Big Hero 6?
Oh, from the
It could happen, yeah.
oh, right. Oh, that's a good one. Well, with the Disney version of it, because they went through yet another kind of they went through a bit of a Disney filter as well. But with the Disney filter, it was John Lasseter who was in charge at the time. What had happened was that Marvel got bought by Disney, and then Disney wanted to do an animated Marvel character, and they were looking at most of the traditional ones. They were looking at Captain America's and Iron Man's and Thor's and a lot of them, and Lasseter wasn't interested in any of that. So he just looked through the library and he found Big Hero 6. So he goes, oh, this is the one I want to do, because he also has a deep abiding love for the Japanese anime. So then when it went through that filter, they took our ideas and they amplified a few things. So in a lot of ways, it's a group that is science-based, kind of like the Fantastic Four were science-based. They explore strange things and science kind of stories and things like that. So you'd want to have a character that challenged some of that. So maybe it would have to be someone like a Doctor Strange or a Modred the Mystic or Brother Voodoo or something like that. Some character like that would be cool.
Or Howard the Duck.
Or Howard the Duck. Actually, he probably fit in perfectly. That's a great idea.
Yeah. He fits into everything. So
yeah, he does. That's true. Well, what is interesting is Howard the Duck and Deadpool in a lot of ways share similar similar vibe, because when they come into a story, the traditional characters have to be warped to work inside their world. They have to acknowledge fourth wall breaks, and I'm talking just dumb, whatever. So.
Yeah, and it kind of, with Howard the Duck, maybe is the progenitor of comics like that, with Pet Avengers, with Squirrel Girl, and similar. It's like a kind of this subgenre in Marvel. Currently, in my opinion.
Well, when that book first came out, that was such a powerful book, and that was also a book that was really big with college students, probably for a lot of obvious reasons. But like Doctor Strange was for the generation before that. Howard the Duck, when Steve Gerber first brought that in, it had an irreverence. It kind of made fun of the world it was in too. It made fun of the material. Yeah. And so it was just it was a great character. I think we have a lot more characters like that now. So in some ways, it's kind of when the Punisher first came into the Marvel universe, a character who was a good guy but killed people was an unusual character. Now we've got characters that kill all the time. So sometimes these trends they start something, but then they lose their uniqueness because everything changes around it. And I wonder if you could recapture where Howard the Duck was at that time, because that was a time and a place too, when he first came.
Can I ask you also, because now you were talking obviously about, and I know even though I haven't watched it, I know the Big Hero 6 was successful and a big project and things like that. But what animation has always been it's always been a popular genre, no doubt. But I've noticed I think in the last 4 or 5 years that it kind of went up a notch. There is a more demand, I think, from the mainstream audience for animation and for things to be animated. Do you, as someone who works in that area, do you feel that? Because as a fan, I kind of notice that there are people who are more open to animation, not just being Disney, and that's it. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's a couple of reasons for that, but you cannot understate the importance of anime in doing that for the world. It was something that the Japanese were very comfortable with. And we over in the States, cartoons are for kids, cartoons are for kids, cartoons are for kids, and it just really got, even though there weren't all animators are doing that. If you look at like a Batchkey and other even earlier Looney Tunes, if you look at that stuff was very political. It was very irreverent. But somewhere along the line, everything started to get shoved into this kind of ghetto, really, as where it went for a long period of time. But didn't mean that those stories couldn't be more sophisticated, that they could be a little more than just a couple of gags and some goofy looking characters, a talking car or whatever. You could kind of blow up that. And I think it was Japanese anime that helped convince that, because there were people over here all the time sitting there going, we can tell more sophisticated stories. We can do bigger tales. We can tell epic stories. It's just, you couldn't get the financing. So the cost was another thing. Now technology is absolutely lowering those costs and opening the opportunities for a lot more creators to come out and be able to make stories that be whatever. It's a genre. It isn't a genre. It's a medium. The genres are the stories, the different things you're telling. It's just a simple medium. And then this is the other thing that I think a lot of people don't really think of when they think about animation. The Marvel movies, a good 70% of these things are animated. I mean, Chris Evans is not doing 3/4 of those things in those rooms, and this isn't just the Marvel movies. These are any kind of action movie these days. The amount of animated CG, but we don't think of it as animated. We don't, but it is. It absolutely is. So there's a whole new generations of people who are creating cinema using animation as one of the key elements of their storytelling, in their arsenal. So the idea that you're going to start to see, well, we'll see what I have a theory of what's going to happen. We're going to see a lot more. You mark my words, even though they haven't announced it, it'll be a couple of years, 2, 3, maybe. That Disney Plus, you'll be able to go on there and go, I want to see the Hulk fight Grogu in a musical, and then you'll punch in, and AI will create it for you. It'll be their sandbox. You're going to see that be a whole genre of you creating, AI creating the short form content that you want to do. But we're going to see all kinds of types of experimentation like that, where you're going to see people in much more surreal settings and things like that. Doctor Strange was just a good kind of mid ground, to kind of get us to that kind of visual storytelling as well. So
Yeah. Do you maybe, because I do, I get frustrated very much when I see some stories being adapted into live action from animation. And even some stories that haven't got any adaptation, but they could be better in animation, but just because they go to live action because that's, I mean, when you make a live action Lion King, I want to find whoever proposed the idea or slap him.
no, I agree with you. That's not something that I'm drawn to myself. I just always think of it as a bit of a cynical cash grab. I think that this is there is a group of people that this is the first time they're seeing this. They did not grow up with the Lion King before, and I would ever want to take an experience if the people who are putting together are doing the best job and it looks good. There's a lot of hard work that went into that. I don't understand the reasons for some of those things. One of the things that I've always appreciated, and it's always really interesting for me to see, because I grew up, everything that I did for comic books was all manual. There was no digital when I first started, and so everything that I did. So the idea of seeing the birth of digital art start to kind of come in, and how that has improved some elements, but how it's also influenced the way stories are told is very different now. Think if you were just to kind of look at comic books, there are always standouts. There are people who are very unique and always will be. But if you were just kind of look at the big bulk of it, so many stories these days are told like storyboards. They are told in these kind of long horizontal pictures and stuff like that. When I was growing up, the camera would be inside of somebody's mouth, or somebody eating a sandwich. It would be all over the place. It'd be weird. It would be no rules at all. And sometimes it was comedic, sometimes it wasn't. And I think sometimes what happens now is that everybody creates work to think about it being a live action film at some point.
Yeah.
Everything goes that way. And I think that you're doing a big disservice to the medium you're working in if you don't use all of the wonderful eccentricities of that medium to tell your story, to relate to the reader. The things that I loved as a kid is I would just stare at any one particular panel. And this is why I like John Byrne so much, is he was the first guy that I ever saw that started drawing the linings and the gloves, and he would do the letters on the keyboards and stuff. And I would just stare at that panel for a half an hour. A book, you can read it in 7 minutes, boom, boom, boom. But, it was the experience of getting lost inside of that stuff that I really hope that as we kind of move along, that what you want to do with some of this is celebrate the filmmakers. You want to celebrate the ways that they created the illusions for you. Because right now with computer graphics, a lot of it is about hiding that stuff. The stagecraft is about making it flawless. And to me, I like a lot of those flaws. I love seeing that people are putting a show on for me because I still appreciate it. You know, they're putting their energy and efforts in something like that, and I wanna know that it's people telling other people's stories ultimately. Uh, for me, uh, that's where I get that's where I,
Hmm?
get meaning from this stuff. So
Yeah. But so how the world is going in? Where is it heading with AI and everything? And considering the entertainment and films and animation and everything, and live action movies in particular, maybe it sounds to me like theater will be the oasis for the genuine uh, uh, movie-like feel, to be expressed. Because, like you said, we are witnessing the animation, we are witnessing this flawless piece of arts, of entertainment. And I don't know if theater will stay like it is because here the trend is lowering with the audience and even with everything. But or will it be also enhanced like the movies with animation, with 3D animation, holographic projections, AI, and similar?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just me guessing. We're all guessing as to where
Yeah.
it's going, but two things. One, this technology that's coming in right now is so new. You don't have the real artists, the true artists who are going to really know how to manipulate it and use it. They're just learning this stuff right now. And those voices are a little ways away until we're gonna see them come up with the really like, wow, I never thought of that. That's so cool and that's so great. That's a little ways away. It's all of us are kind of playing at it, and there are people who are monetizing it right now, getting it out there
Yeah.
quick. I don't think that that's where the real art is yet with that stuff. So I mean, I'm always going to bet on people coming up with ways that stuff wasn't intended and coming up with clever ways. I just always will. That's my hopeful side. The other thing is, I just think in general, the way that I grew up and the media that I consumed is so delivered so differently than it is now. Um, I grew up in a much older kind of format. You know, there were 3 channels of TV where I grew up, and there was a movie that would stay in the theaters for half a year and things like that. Now it's such quick turnover and there's so much stuff, but that is in the old legacy media. I mean, you guys, what you're doing right now with your show and TikTok and all of these short form things, we're getting into a whole new world of types of storytelling, and it's a lab, and there's a lot of people trying out a lot of different stuff. A lot of it's stupid. Most of it's stupid, but it's really great. Some of it's really cool, and so uh, I don't know if everything is going to. I mean, these big giant blockbuster movies, uh, they're always going to be here. But when I was younger, that's what there was. That was only it. You went to go see the movies, or you went and saw really bad TV on your 3 channels. Now, there's just so much more. There's so many other things. So I don't know. One of my kids, he doesn't watch TV at all. He doesn't watch TV. He doesn't really watch movies. He's all social media and video games. That's his world. So his narrative world, the world that he occupies, is very different than the one I grew up in. Center.
Yeah.
It's a generational thing, as most of entertainment is.
Yeah, quite different from ours as well.
Right.
Because, for us, the first option was a playground, then movies or TV. Yeah.
It's just because the world maybe is moving at exponential speed. The things are so much quicker. So, because maybe in 20 years previously there wasn't any change. Now, in 5 years, things are completely different.
You know, exactly. I mean, one of the things that I found myself doing, this was something, my dad was a graphic artist, and I remember this is in the 80s. I came back from school and was having to go back to college to learn a thing called Photoshop, because all of the younger artists were able to pitch 20 things when he would do everything traditional with markers and pens and drafting tables and all of that stuff. He'd turn in 3, and these younger guys were turning in 20. He's like, I can't compete with that. I need to go back to school and learn this technology. And I remember at that time going, okay, as technology comes, I'm going to have to stay ahead of it too if I want to stay in the marketplace.
Yeah.
But in the last 3 years between Unreal Engine and all of its kind of competitors, and I've had to learn about 20 new types of software just to kind of stay relevant or be able to talk to people who really know how to use it, at least intelligently, talk to them. And the impulse to stay in front of technology was my impulse is you got to stay on top of this stuff, stay in front of it. But it's coming so fast now. The whole notion of staying in front of anything is kind of, well, I think it might not be the smartest move. It is finding some and mastering a few of them and working inside of that. And so we're going to have a competition of ideas. I mean, AI and all these things are going to keep moving on, but I'll use this as my example. And then when, like I was saying, all my brothers were engineers. That's because my dad was an artist and they knew there was no money in art. So they all wanted to become. We had a big conversation when VHS machines showed up. There was a difference between the standard VHS and the Betamax. And Betamax, this is so old school, but Betamax technically was a much better system than the VHS. But the VHS became the popular one because it was cheaper and easier to use. And so we bought the Betamax and we didn't get to watch any videos in our house and movies, or our library was limited. Because the other one, the less expensive, the not quite as good, but the one that everybody was buying took over. And so when we're moving through this with AI and as we're moving through this with all these different types of software, it isn't necessarily always going to be the best stuff. It's going to be the one that the people use the most and the ones that the people, more people can identify with and work. And those are going to be the ones that kind of become the industry leaders. And so that is going to affect the media that you consume too. I mean, if you think about drones, the idea of drones just coming in and how that has affected the way you look at a film now. It's all of these big beauty shots that used to cost a lot for a helicopter. And now the drone can go through the house and up and stuff like that. You're just going to see these kind of things start to be the way stories unfold. They're just visually going to be these technologies that a lot of people can use, that it doesn't cost a lot to do, that people who are working out of their garages or their home offices, they can create media. We're going to see a lot more of that stuff.
Yeah. And talking about adapting animation in live movies, and it goes vice versa, you also have let's call it a horse in the race, because Ben 10 is being speculated to have a live action and is wanted to have a live action movie for years. And especially since the last year, there are rumors about Tom Holland, fans wanting him to see him and everything. So what's your stance about adapting Ben 10 into live action? Is it the same Ben 10 just with in live action, or is it with more adult themes, with darker theme and that?
And do you want it?
And do you want it? Yeah.
No, I think those are all really good questions. And I'll tell you what I want, and that does not necessarily mean that it will show up that way, though. We would push it forward in certain ways. The idea of doing a live action Ben 10, something that was done, on the same level as some of the Marvel stuff, would be really quite thrilling to do. That, after having said that, if we could do an animated feature like a Big Hero 6 where it was to that level and that quality, that would be quite wonderful as well. Both of them would be, in my mind, I would want to make sure that they have a slightly more adult themes, or at least the stakes being, high stakes. That there is real loss and real danger in them. I think that's something that we've always wanted, whether it was targeted towards a younger audience or even an older audience. My standard has always been that when my kids were young and I would watch animation, that I wasn't bored myself as a parent, that I would found something that I could go, oh, wow, that's cool, or that I get that, or I get that joke. That joke was for me, or this story was for me, or something like that. So no matter what we would do, we would always want to make sure that that was part of it. I know that the fan base that grew up with Ben would really love a super mature kind of like, a grim, dark version of Ben. And we're not necessarily against that notion by any stretch of imagination. I think one of the things that's most important about Ben, though, is kind of a buffoon. He's kind of a cocky kid. He's all of these things, but he also does try to do good. And so I wouldn't want his character to change in the sense that he is trying to improve stuff. He has his impulses, his kid impulses of doing stuff, but ultimately he's a good kid. And that would influence the tone of the show. You don't want a good kid lose ultimately, or become cynical. I think you want to have that goodness challenge them. Want to have that optimistic outlook challenged. I think that's important. As far as it happening, I can tell you, I can't give you any updates really. There have been attempts, and some pretty big attempts over the years, to kind of get Ben to the screen. But right now, between Warner Brothers and Discovery purchases, and where's Cartoon Network, and where the rights are on certain things, and who is doing what at what time, everything's a little turned on its head right now. So there isn't going to be anything happening in the next year or two that would be, but there are efforts. There are always concerted efforts to bring a big budget giant Ben to the screen. And something about us as Man of Action, we've already produced a couple of features and things like that. So, I mean, I think we do a better job of it now as we've got a little more experience with us than if it started before. So that's just something that that's about as good as I can give you.
That's enough. Yeah. Well, like every other franchise that has a big fan base, so Ben 10 also has it. And it has a lot of theories, fan theories, searching for Easter eggs and everything. What's maybe the weirdest theory that you have heard about Ben 10?
Oh, well, let's just say that I think that the ones that are always very surprising are the R34 Ben 10 hookups. There's so many of those. I guess well, that's
not fair. Trust me. Those some people on the internet, they're not real.
yes, that's right. That's true. That's true. Well, but Ben and Gwen, they're related, and they seem to always. I was like, come on, guys, genetics here.
Well, maybe they are from Alabama.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to be honest, I really do try to stay away from some of the Reddit subs and stuff like that, specifically because,
It's crazy.
well, it's not only that it's crazy. There's some actually really good ideas. People have really great ideas. I just don't want to be the person I don't want to go, oh, that's a really great idea, and then use it. I just don't want to be that person. I just don't want to be that person.
Yeah, it was like, for example, George Martin, whenever he sees a theory that is correct, he changed the plot of the Game of Thrones. So,
Well, that's right. Yeah, there's a couple of those writers out there who do that. George Martin, Pat Rothfuss, Jessica Lynch. There's so many of them. The guys that really get into the power scaling, I always find really interesting too. Those theories are so out there, but it does get into mashups and things like that. And so it is fun to see how Ben would operate. And we've got this asked a lot, actually a lot. And it is something that we had when we first pitched this to Cartoon Network, was the idea of building a version of the MCU for them, using Ben as kind of the touchstone to kind of build out a team of other characters that had their own standalone cartoons, Rex being a version of
Yeah.
that. And then eventually start to see how they could all kind of work as a unit, or start to kind of use a platform to tell some of these kind of crossover stories, and to use other ones from other popular cartoons, like they have been doing. I mean, you could see Secret Saturdays was not something we came up with, but the idea of crossovers and things like that was always something that I always enjoyed. I enjoyed those kind of stories. If they have some consequences to them. So the Heroes United was something that we really wanted to see if we couldn't keep pushing. So I see a lot of people who have theories of like, well, what would happen if Gwen and Daphne from Scooby-Doo had their own notes together? It's like, oh, that is actually kind of interesting. They're both, I mean, in a lot of ways, Gwen, they're redheads, but in some ways, Gwen would kind of be more of the Thelma character, right? She's kind of a little more bookish and and so Daphne would still, but it's just interesting, the way that people make certain links and stuff like that. I always find fascinating. I mean, I was telling this to some people at a convention, just a couple of months ago. I I got to meet like Jack Kirby, and I got to meet Stan Lee, and I got to meet all of those guys. And I was so thankful because they kind of made my childhood great. They did all of that for me. And so the idea that I could be a part of that, like, continuum, is just so thrilling to me. The notion that there will be other people that hopefully they're going to come up with great ideas too. That somebody out there is going to come up with something super cool and astound the audience with those stories and stuff like that. And to know that it, in some kind of small way, help kind of be a connector between these different groups is really quite, well, it's humbling, but it's also really quite an honor to
Yeah.
be part of. And so when I see people coming up with these theories and stuff like that, I know part of the time that's never going to happen. But I also know from my own experience, they're going to just change the names and a couple of things, and they're going to come up with something just as cool. All of the characters like Generator X, Ben, even Big Hero 6, those all kind of came around the same time while working for Marvel. that we just didn't pitch to them because then they don't at all. And but it was kind of being in that world, and knowing that you were part of something that other people had started. It's really cool. And so that's what I think those theories are ultimately. I don't know if they're going to apply to anything I wind up ultimately doing, but I do know that some of those people will act on them eventually. They'll act on them, put them together, they'll come out with something that's awesome. So
Yeah, yeah. Also, at the same time, in Marvel, there was a storyline, Monsters Unleashed. With that character coming around, and Elsa Bloodstone being into all of that. The perfect place for Generator X, at least.
it would be cool. He was actually, before Iron Man had nanites, I was like, Iron Man should have nanites.
Uh,
I said, "Oh, wait, let's just keep that to ourselves."
yeah, that's cool. But you mentioned like having this kind of MCU, like this shared universe. Is it still an idea and with the rise and popularity of reboots currently, for example, for Generator Rex, and with Ben 10 being popular as ever, and other characters, is there still an idea, maybe even just for comics, to have the shared universe and to build on it?
Yeah, I think that we're always constantly pushing that idea and testing that idea in the different mediums. Like we are going to be doing a Ben 10 comic coming out next year with a Dynamite that we're actually in charge of. So some of the things that we were talking about as far as themes and maturity levels and art styles and stuff like that, we're going to get to explore with some of that. So whether or not this is the short answer on things like that. Yes, we're always pushing towards that. But the way that some of these deals get structured, even internally through Cartoon Network used to have a model where they would not green light, say, let's go ahead and make a cartoon until they had a toy manufacturer who was buying into it and also helping financially help out the production. And Mattel has Generator X, and Bandai or Playmates now has Ben 10 at the moment. And those two toy companies don't talk to each other and won't work with each other. So I've often said that on Twitter too. It's like, if you can get those two universes to cross, then it'll be more. We'll have a so it gets very boring and legal with some of these things on how some of this stuff gets put together and how it gets financed. Because the intent is always there. We created these things so that they could play off of each other, so that they could be part of the same world, much like a Marvel universe. It's just that Cartoon Network in of itself isn't the same as a single publisher. The way that they put things together, it's a whole bunch of different ways the deals get made. So
that makes sense.
I just wanted to ask you perhaps a final one from me. When we were talking about the theories, the fan theories, and then obviously you expanding on the universe and things like that. As I get a little bit older, one of the things that I find is that I like a little bit more of ambiguity in my stories. Previously I needed to know everything, find out about everything. These days a little bit, I'm good with not knowing what happened, who is this character, where he comes from, everything. Do you find that as a creator, do you find that a little bit maybe a struggle? Do you want to know about everything that you personally write or watch, or are you good with it?
I think what you're asking is that, do we know these things and leave them unanswered Right. Yes, for the most part, but that can't be everything, because we're not actually inventing another universe where, we're coming up with as many elements. But the way that we work as a group is a lot of these questions get raised, and we have a Bible, like one that nobody will see, just all of the different kinds of aspects to it. We try to, but doesn't mean that if you have something and a better idea doesn't eventually show up, that you change that. So it can be mutable. It can be changeable. Um, you try to come up with as much and you try to have as much as you can, but you discover things along the way. As far as storytelling, I agree with you. I'd much rather, and this is something that because we also work an awful lot in video game too. We do a lot of world building for video games. Um, the best type of video games, or the ones I really like, is if you are somebody who loves to explore the world and it's an open world game, and you're somebody who loves to go and do all the readables and everything else, you are going to find stories that are there, but you wouldn't have gotten the complete full picture unless you did the work, of just going around and discovering it. I do like to hide all of those things in stories. Like I do the way certain people talk or whatever, or how they approach something. It can be motivated by something that's never talked out loud, but I do know their motivation for it. And so that kind of implicit storytelling, that kind of leaving things there, not being explicit, like holding hands. And that's the big difference, I think, between what's regarded widely over here as kids media and adult media, is that kids media, they try to make everything super explicit, tell everything, just tell everything. I think kids love to discover. I mean, don't you want to know more than your buddy? Isn't that kind of like how you win in a nerd argument, is who knows more? Is like, that pelt was a Wookiee pelt, or that a fat hat on his belt. It's just knowing these things because you've done the work to discover them and know all of that stuff. To me, I love leaving stuff like that for people too. It's important. And also that's how the world operates. We don't know everything in the world. It doesn't mean that it's not there. It's just we don't know it.
Fair enough.
Based on Lucas' question and what you are talking about, so if I was to ask you, because we all know that Vilgax, for example, is a conqueror, and we know that he's seeking omnitrix for power, but if I were to ask you, is there something beyond the power? What is his origin story? Do you have answer in your head which you won't share, or just blank space?
No. There's a whole backstory with him and Azimuth, and they have a whole life. And I can tell you that one of the things that we want to work on, and we have developed over a period of time, and we'll see how it will get a light of day, is we have been working on a Kevin 11 kind of spin-off too, that would give you, I mean, everybody's got their A story, but then there's their B story of the things that they've done, the things they've done that either you don't want people to know, or that people have painted you as something, and then all of a sudden you realize you've got a family who are actually quite, you're a villain, but your family's wonderful. That through other characters, through other ways and other lenses, to explore some of those backstories. Because I don't know if for Ben it always matters who Vilgax is, but maybe for some other characters and us as viewers, it would be really cool to find out more about him than just those things. And yes, we do have he's much more than. There's nothing more boring in my mind than somebody who just wants to conquer for conquer's sake. To me, that would be an interesting story. Is okay, you've won. What are you going to do now? There's some plumbing over at the so-and-so's building that needs to be fixed. There's parking issues. All of a sudden, ruling sucks. That would be a lot more fun of a story. Just world domination or universal domination in of itself is, whatever.
Yeah, we have the Alexander the Great to blame for that arc.
That's right.
Conquer until you die. So.
That's right. Well, that's ultimately, I think, isn't that the lesson though? The conquerors don't do anything but conquer. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and here's a fan question, because I really need to know. How many times are you maybe on conventions or on the street even? Do people mistake you for Vincent D'Onofrio? Because when you put that fedora and everything, you have same vibe.
So Vincent D'Onofrio, though, if you've ever met him, he's I speak in feet. I wonder how I could put it in meters. He's a tall guy. He's tall. I'm not. He's by a good head and a half taller than I am. So maybe sitting down. I actually I haven't heard the Vincent D'Onofrio. I've heard the Jack Nicholson eyebrows, and I've heard a couple of other people over the years, but no Vincent. I'll take Vincent D'Onofrio. I also get
Yeah.
what's his name? Did you ever see? He played the Thing in the old Fantastic Four movie, the Shield. I forget his name. The
What's the name of? I can't remember. Also the name. Yeah,
I get that one.
I know you.
I thought people that's the frequent occasion, but okay. Maybe it's just me.
Well, believe it or not, that's what I moved out to Los Angeles to be, was an actor many years ago, back when I had hair. And people used to mistake me for Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh, that was nice.
Yeah, that was all the questions for today. But before we wrap up, we have a little tradition because we are based in Montenegro. We want to bring this little country into the world as well. And we have a little tradition where we say a quote from one of our either poets, politicians, writers, etc. on our language and translate it to English. And for this episode, I've chosen a quote from our writer called Branislav Nušić. And he said on our language, "Mudrost je ljudska, često zbir ljudskih ludosti." And translated to English, it would be, "Human wisdom is often the sum of human follies." He was always a simple guy, but right in the middle. So
I love that. It's a great notion. It's very true.
yeah, it kind of makes sense. You know?
I think anything that we, everything we do is ultimately can be regarded as a mistake and a lesson learned.
Yeah. Not just the human wisdom, but also human bravery is a sum of human follies. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this hour and a half on our podcast. We certainly did.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you for your good questions too. So
thank you for the better answers.
We stay genuine, uncensored, and unscripted, and we always will, as we have to order our usual. Share us and subscribe us, and stay tuned until the next Wednesday. IKUZO!